At the start of this month, I finished The Glass Bead Game by Hermann Hesse. Hesse is the legendary German writer, won the Nobel Prize for Literature. He wrote books like Siddhartha and Steppenwolf, and this is his final novel, published in 1943. There was an earlier translation of this book into English titled Magister Ludi, which had some questionable moments, and the title was a bit misleading. So this is the second translation into English. It is translated by Richard and Clara Winston. This book takes place a couple hundred years into the future, and Hesse imagines a world where intellect has become sort of the supreme force governing bodies in Europe, especially. He imagines this province called Castalia, who are sort of these intellectual arbiters. They sort of have their hands in all of the main institutions, and they take a role similar to what the Catholic Church traditionally has done in Europe. The citizens of Castalia and the people living in this future that Hesse imagines, they're operating in a society in which the ultimate aspiration is sort of the intellect. And one of the ways this manifests itself in the society is the creation of this glass bead game. And the glass bead game is never exactly defined, but it is an intellectual exercise in which players engage in following various modes of thought and making connections between history and science and music and art. But the rules are never exactly defined. We don't know exactly what the glass bead game is. The glass bead game seems to be just a highfalutin mode of saying thought. These people are thinking. They're just sort of thinking about a lot of things. And so you have this sort of governing body, or not governing body, but this body of intellectuals in Castalia who are prizing the intellect, and sort of, in the parlance of our times, they are sort of gatekeeping syncretic thought in a way. And they're seeking out people who are able to make these sort of connections, and they are fostering the development of pure intellectual individuals. The leader of this game, the glass bead game, the sort of pope, if you will, he is the Magister Ludi. And this book is the biography of one person who held the title Magister Ludi, and his name is Joseph Knecht. The big thing, the sort of most immediate thing to know about Joseph Knecht is that his surname Knecht means servant. And so he is living a life of service, and as he ages, you sort of see him begin to bump against that. The thing he is serving, the ideas he is serving, he isn't as sure that he is doing things the right way, or that Castalia in general is approaching this idea of ultimate intellectual purity in a way that is really beneficial to society. The beginning of this book has like a history of the glass bead game in Castalia, and then we get the beginning of Joseph's life. We sort of follow his life. It's a Bildungsroman, following him from his childhood until he ascends to the Magister Ludi. Hesse in this book, and his writing in general, he finds a way to maintain this really clear prose style that is at times dense, but it's never unforgiving. It really wants your attention, and he's able to sort of capture this mode of expressing intellectual ideas in a way that reminds me almost of like almost like a fairy tale. The book concludes with what are called the three lives. Part of Joseph Knecht's education at Castalia and becoming Magister Ludi is writing imagined biographies of himself in previous incarnations. These are actually stories that Hesse published previously, and he sort of sticks them on at the end, and we are able to use them as a final bit of insight into the interior of Joseph Knecht, because this book is it's a biography. We're sort of always at a remove from Knecht, really, and so this is sort of the deepest, clearest peek into the mind of the man that we get. I believe this book is a masterpiece. I think this book is perfect. It captures so much of what is going on in philosophy and art and the sort of raising up of intellectualism, sort of to the detriment of spirituality and religiosity, and how there's sort of a necessary seeking of a balance. You know, Hesse is a really spiritual guy, and so this thought of finding balance is what is driving a lot of the book here. Following that, I read Girl with Curious Hair by David Foster Wallace. I found myself in this cycle of reading David Foster Wallace only in odd numbered years, something I sort of noticed a couple of years ago that had happened naturally over time, and I like the idea of continuing that. I think David Foster Wallace is a writer I really enjoy, but his tone is so unique. It's very powerful. It really like grabs a hold of you in a way that I could never like read all of his books back to back. You know, I think it would be too much. And so having this space in between has been really nice. And this is actually the first collection of short fiction that I've read by him. This book came out in 1989, so he's already published a novel. He's been writing for a couple years at this point, but we still get a lot of like youthful exuberance in these stories. I found these stories to be a little bit mixed, to be honest. All of the stories that are sort of based in our reality, they sort of draw from real people, you know, Alex Trebek and David Letterman and, you know, Hawaii Five-0. All that stuff is really great. I really liked all of those stories. It's the stories where he's really engaging in a lot of like super high level postmodernism. He's really shifting the form in ways that are very experimental. I didn't enjoy those stories as much, but the Little Expressionless Animals and Girl with Curious Hair, Linden, My Appearance, these stories were all excellent. And of course, the grand finale here is Westward the Course of Empire Takes Its Way, which is basically a novella. It's like a 150-page story at the end here. And in this story, you really get the seeds of Infinite Jest. It's really obvious that the things that are in Infinite Jest have been occupying David Foster Wallace for years and years. This story takes a lot from television, which if you've ever watched an interview with David Foster Wallace, you know, really preoccupied him. He thought a lot about television and what it was doing to sort of the youth. And one of the things I noticed in this story, which I imagine must have been intentional, but I haven't done any like research into it. It's 150 pages and the bulk of it takes place in a car. They are driving from an airport to like a convention of like a reunion of people who've appeared in McDonald's commercials. And I realized maybe halfway through, like, oh, you know, all the television stuff, they're stuck in a car. This is a bottle episode. This story is a bottle episode. And of course, you know, we get some flashbacks and some back and forth, but a lot of the action is confined into this vehicle. There's also a lot of stuff in here that shows his like personal, it seems to show his like personal anxieties about writing and himself as an artist. There's discussions of postmodern literature and varying degrees of like cynicism regarding the future of literature and the ability to write anything at all. The characters in here belong to a writer's workshop, and sort of the golden child of this writer's workshop has never written anything at all, and the only thing he's really able to write is kind of a reinterpretation of his professor's work or life. That professor, of course, being kind of a stand-in for John Barth. And John Barth's book, Lost in the Funhouse, is a main theme of this story as well. It was really nice to revisit David Foster Wallace. It's been a couple years. It will probably be a couple years again until I read more of his stuff, but he's always nice to return to. And this was a great collection. Definitely check it out if you haven't yet. I read The Fortune of the Rougons by Emile Zola. This is the first book of his Rougon-Macquart series. This is a series of 20 books where he is looking at the current political, social state of France. Emile Zola is interested in looking at how the shifting times, the political changes and upheavals are depicted through just one family. And so he creates the Rougon-Macquart family, and this is their origin story. He says that this book could also be titled The Origin. He begins by describing the small town in France and a field that has sort of been used as a like lumber yard, sort of like a public area that's not necessarily tended to by the government, but it used to be the cemetery. At one point, the bones, there were just too many bodies and too many bones, and so at the beginning of the story, they are literally digging up skeletons and dragging them across the town in like wheelbarrows. And of course, not all of the skeletons are removed. There are bones still there and tombstones that are still there, but death death is literally filling this town, right? So it's not being subtle at the beginning. And this field is sort of connected to the property near the property of the main family here, the Rougons family, who have a sort of checkered past from the beginning. Everyone in this family has some sort of OCD, some sort of compulsion towards greed or sloth, especially the two sort of main half brothers. One of them is desperately seeking wealth. He spends his entire life seeking wealth. Almost 30 years of his life flashes by in a chapter, and he's just failing to find this wealth. And the other brother is originally a soldier, and when he comes back from war, he has no interest in working at all. He just wants to get money by being, supported by people who actually work and earn money. He has no interest in work. He just wants to sort of be drunk all the time. This desire for wealth, this desire for stability and sort of prime position, or being in an advantageous position to sort of receive benefits from those around you. These sort of things, they sort of filter down throughout the generation, and all of the members of this family have some sort of hang up regarding money and status. The bulk of the plot here is about this town and the imminent coup d'etat of Napoleon III. So we're in France in the 1850s. France is currently a republic, and Napoleon III is going to stage a coup d'etat and create a new empire. And in this town and in this family, we have two sides: people who are actively supporting this attempt to make a new empire, and the sort of Republican army that wants to keep things as they are. The Rougons side of the family is really trying to use this coup d'etat as a chance to create status for themselves, to create wealth. They put themselves in a position, kind of in like a salon, this yellow room where the local elite sort of come together and discuss empire business. It's almost like a salon from Proust, right? These people coming together and just sort of bloviating about politics and whatnot. The Republican side of things, they're more the local farmers and peasantry, and we get the biggest insight into this side of the story through one of the Macquart descendants, Sylvain Macquart. And he's one of the characters we're first introduced to, and he's quite a young man, and he decides to join the army and fight for the Republic. So we get this sort of establishment of this family, and Zola really goes step by step into how this family was founded and got to where it is. And then he takes a break to describe in detail, more detail than anything he's done yet. He describes the childhood and the life of Sylvain and him meeting his love, his Miette. It's sort of like a teenage romance. He's sort of playing the politics and the romance against each other. One of them is so pure and innocent and ideal, and one of them is so greedy and cynical, and how they are sort of emerging from the same society. It's quite a dichotomy there. And, of course this doesn't go well. Of course things end up tragically, right? I think it's best to read yourself to find out what ends up happening, but I found the ending of this book quite moving. I thought it was sort of a classical, like a high tragic moment, a high tragic ending with wonderful symmetry and symbolism, and knowing that there are 19 more books to come. It sets up things in such a clear way. Zola does he makes a strong impression in this first book that he's not going to shy away from tragedy and cynicism, but the writing is quite beautiful, and the characters are sort of the key here. We get to read about them, in the next 19 books, and I'm really looking forward to doing that. I might read one of these every, I don't know. I mean, I could see myself reading one of these every 2 or 3 months, until I'm finished. I thought this was really excellent, and I would like to continue. I read Armand V by Dag Solstad. This is the last Solstad book to be translated into English that I haven't read, so I'm happy to have read it. I've read all of his stuff in English. This book has a structural conceit. It is footnotes to a novel that doesn't exist. And this seems to be like a manifestation of Solstad's like frustrations or anxieties about being a writer, especially over so many years. He's kind of bumping into the fact that he might not have as much to say, or the words might not be coming to him as easily as they used to. So instead of writing this novel, the idea he has for a novel, he writes these, he calls them footnotes to the novel. Because of that, it sort of gives him an excuse to veer away from any real like narrative progress, or sort of make digressions and things at will. He does so. He goes on long tangents in this book. Our sort of main character is Armand V, who is a diplomat who has sort of reached the pinnacle of his career. You know, he is the Norwegian ambassador to London. It's this big, prestigious career position, right? As he's reached this point of his life, his ultimate success, he's sort of reflecting on what led him here, his relationship with his son and his various ex-wives, the sort of culture he grew up in, and the way society is depicted now, you know, around him. There's also like an 80-page digression where he is talking about Armand V's childhood friend group, like these sort of group of artists in university in the 1960s and early 70s in Norway, and the sort of shenanigans that they would get up to, and intellectual discussions that they would have. There's like a 20-page section in here, maybe 20 pages, where he's talking about this this group of friends and how they would observe each other, and if they observed each other doing something typical of each other, they would say, oh, well, that's typical Johnson, that's typical Daniel, whatever. And how this creates like this ultimate existential dread, because none of them want to be able to be like seen so clearly by each other, and like the various like endless implications of this being seen. It gets very, very into the nitty-gritty of that, like that sort of depth of digression here, and it's about 80 pages of this before we get back to Armand V. The stuff in here about aging, the stuff in here about being unable to write, the stuff in here where he's sort of directly addressing the fact that there is an unwritten novel that is an imagined novel behind these footnotes, behind this book, behind Armand V. I thought that was really interesting. But I think like this conceit of footnotes to an unwritten book, like by nature, leads to difficulty finding any sort of cohesion. And so I think this book doesn't always succeed in what it's trying to do, but it's a really interesting idea and experiment, and Solstad's voice is really pleasant to me. I really like the way he writes. So I had fun reading this book, but I couldn't say I rate it as highly as maybe Tea Singer or Shyness and Dignity. But I'm happy to have gotten to this one. I'm happy to read more Solstad, and I'm crossing my fingers that we get more English translations of his stuff. I read Ask the Dust by John Fante. This is a book of Los Angeles in the 1930s and a struggling writer. He's a young man. He's got to be 19 or 20. He has published a short story, and he is attempting to publish more, and it's sort of about just the tribulations of his life, trying to make it, you know, the lack of money and then the sudden flux of money when something gets published. At the same time, he's sort of meeting women, and he's having trouble with women, and he's unable to sort of perform when he meets these women. But the way he interacts with women is incredibly problematic and toxic. He is racist, and he is violent. The sort of codependence that this creates between him and his sort of main interest, Camilla, it just creates this very, very problematic relationship that we see sort of from beginning to end. The main character here is Arturo Bandini, who I think Fante has written about in other books, but this book is so strong and so powerful. Like the voice of this character is really strong. I'm not sure I could read, knowing where this book goes, I'm not sure I could read a prequel, but I think there might be a sequel that I would consider checking out. Bandini is also an Italian. He comes from like an Italian family. And so there's a lot of like projection of his like inner insecurities. He's sort of projecting onto Camilla, who is a Mexican, saying things like, well, you're not an American, I'm an American, and this confuses Camilla. The writing here is very direct and fearless. Fante does such a great job of creating this point of view of Bandini that you sort of are rising and falling with him as quickly as he does, you know. When times are bad, they're very, very bad. And when times are good, it's you know, elation, pure elation. The world he creates here, this Los Angeles of the 1930s, it's almost legendary. It's like, it's a place I can imagine so clearly that I imagine it's just sort of filtered through, like, from this book into all different kinds of media. It's just very, very clear in my head, you know, the diners and the poverty and the sort of people from all these different backgrounds meeting in this city, trying to make it in this life. There's a preface by Charles Bukowski, and it's obvious why Bukowski likes this book. So if you don't like Bukowski, then it's, I mean, you might get something out of this book, but it definitely stands in that milieu, I would say. I finally read A Book of Memories by Peter Nadash, which I had wanted to read at the beginning of this year, and, you know, life gets in the way. From the jump, I need to say this book probably deserves its own video. This is one of the greatest reading experiences I've ever had. I absolutely loved this book, A Book of Memories. I loved it to bits. We see on the cover this blurb comparing this book to Robert Musil and Marcel Proust and James Joyce and Thomas Mann. And that is something Nadash is actively pursuing. He is unafraid of reaching that level, and in many ways he does so. He is trying to create this high, modernist, maximalist style that comes from a more contemporary place. Nadash is a Hungarian writer born in the 1940s, and this book was published in 1986, but I think it spent a few years in like publication hell trying to get past some censors. And, you know, understandably so, considering this is coming from communist, socialist Europe, and there is explicit stuff in here. Some of the most explicit scenes of eroticism and sexuality I've ever read. Very remarkable images. Again, another writer I would describe as fearless, Peter Nadash. This book is a little difficult to follow because there's 3 or 4 threads that are being tied together, but they jump back and forth. There's no clear timeline, so Nadash asks a lot of the reader to sort of pick up on clues about what's happening, what's real, what's not real. But the main thread here, the main thing is a man is living in East Berlin, and he's in a love affair with another man who is a poet. But there's also complications with a woman who is an actor, and so their sort of relationship is being discussed. And at the same time, this narrator is in the midst of writing his own book, sort of his childhood, or he's telling the story of his childhood in Budapest, and he's talking about his family history, his experiences, and his like sexual awakenings as a child, his group of friends that he grew up with, the sort of the implications of growing up in like a communist state. All of this leading up to the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, which Nadash was a teenager for, he experienced. So we have these long bits of narrative about his childhood interspersed with bits of narrative that are explaining his current situation. We also get extracts from a novel that seems in the more traditional modernist style, kind of like a 19th century almost style, of another man who is dealing with his own sexual proclivities. His sort of sexuality is directly in opposition to his status as like an aristocratic person in Europe at the time. Homosexuality plays a big role in this novel, and there are lots of moments of introspection and attempts to achieve some sort of clarity through experiencing acts of sex and acts of sort of introspective, almost navel-gazing, but not quite as narcissistic. This older story, it seems to be the novel that the narrator of the bulk of this book is writing. He's writing a novel about this man, and so the emotional beats of his childhood and of his current love affair with a man named Melchior He's sort of taking and raising to another level of like of aesthetic purity. And then the final bit we get at the end, towards the end, there's like a 90-page chapter in which one of the characters from the childhood portions, he writes an essay or a diary that is sort of giving his own perspective on the events of the childhood, offering a lot of clarity. Especially the writings of our narrator here are really obtuse and sort of hard to make out. As I say, it's a little bit confusing as to which parts are real and which parts are not until you get like close to the end of the book. And so this last chapter does a lot of help clarifying things. So these are sort of the narrative bits that come together and create this book. And it is this pure high modernist exploration into ideas of identity, sexuality, politics, and what especially it's doing is looking at how people relate to each other, how especially physical bodies relate to each other, the ways in which bodies come together, and the ways that these the connections of these bodies create like meaning, or they allow for the further investigation into like meaning of life and you know and everything. His style, I would say, to be polite, I would say it's long-winded. He goes on extensive rants, not rants, but these paragraphs that are one sentence with 8 semicolons, and he uses a lot of sort of flowery prose. The prose style here is very beautiful and very sometimes dreamlike, sometimes sort of more classical style. And as I said, it is incredibly explicit. There is a scene, and I guess here's your like trigger warning if you're not interested in stuff with like essay or like incest or pedophilia. Like here's your out. There is a scene in this book where the narrator is describing his almost his first awareness of the taboos of sexuality. He is a young boy, as young boys do when they can't sleep. They enter the beds of their parents. He has already at this point been exposed to far more explicit images of sex than should have occurred to a young child, right? He has walked in on his father in the midst of having an affair with another woman. So he's aware of this sort of power emerging from the genitals of his father. The way his body is moving and making this woman move. So he's sort of got this awareness of his father's genitals. There's a scene where he can't sleep and he goes into bed and he's sort of cuddling up next to his father, and he reaches down and he grabs his father's penis. And of course, this is like, the father totally freaks out, changes their relationship forever. And it is done explicitly and beautifully. And so at this point, Nadash is fearless, right? He is not afraid to explore to the very, very depths of intimacy and physical connection. And so later on, we get this wonderful, sublime, amazing chapter describing the sort of adolescence of the narrator and his friends. And one of his friends, Kalman, they're at Kalman's farm, and that you see them observing a pig, and the pig is described as sort of it's turned away so that the pig's rear is facing them, and he makes note of the pig's teats, and so you're like, oh god, one of these kids is gonna have sex with this pig, right? And in a wonderful subversion of that, instead the boys help this pig deliver children. It's pregnant, and it's having a really terrible pregnancy, and so the boys have to get really like physically involved in the birthing of these piglets. The physicality of this act, it creates this irreversible connection between the two boys. That chapter, what's the name of that chapter? This chapter, Grass Grew Over the Scorched Spot. This is 130 pages. It might be, ask me any day, I might tell you it's the best thing I've ever read. It might be. I thought it was unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. This book needs like 30 minutes of discussion at least, probably more. It is unbelievably beautiful, unbelievably well written and well structured and bold. As I said, he's unafraid of trying to reach the heights of a Musil, of a Man, of a Proust. I can't explain it enough how blown away I am, and I'd like to read more Dadash as soon as possible. This book was really, at times, tough to get through. So it might be a while before I revisit him, but gosh, wonderful stuff. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I needed something a little bit lighter to end the month, so I finished with The Confession of a False Soul by Ilarie Voronca, which is the pen name for, the pen name for Eduard Marcus, who is a Romanian writer who moved to France and ended up publishing primarily in French. This book came out in 1942, and it is kind of like a, I would call it a gentle surrealism novel. It is definitely surreal in tone and in matter. It is about a man who replaces his soul with a false soul. It is the soul of a dead soldier. This operation of imposing a new soul on your own, or removing your soul and replacing it with another one, it seems to be like a medical procedure that is practiced widely, and they've realized that replacing the souls with those of soldiers provides the best results because they still have a lot of vitality, as opposed to souls of older folks. Unfortunately, the soul is quite strong, and there's a scene with a seance in which the soul attempts almost to sort of take over. The soul has sort of unfinished business. He has a love that he has left behind. And so this book becomes a lot of searching for this lost love. It's only 90 pages, 90 short pages, and like a dozen of them are a scene of a dinner, and they're just sort of espousing as poetically as possible the virtues of garlic. It's a funny book. It's a funny and sweet short read. I think, as I said, it's definitely surreal, but if you've tried to read a surreal book before and you've been confused, or you've sort of wished there was a little more to hold on to, you don't feel as comfortable in this sort of free flowing state of surrealism, I highly recommend this one. This is a nice way to sort of get your dose of the surreal without feeling like you have to totally surrender yourself to any sort of lack of footing, Really great book, put out from Snuggly Books. And, as much as it looks like it's an NYRB cover, it's not. It is from Snuggly Books, The Confession of a False Soul by Ilarie Voronca. And that's everything I read this month. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.